Going to call to order this meeting, which is the 75th meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. We are considering our order of reference, which has been received in November on a study of immigration to Atlantic Canada, known as Motion 39, and we welcome our witnesses who are here to provide their expertise and their thoughts on fairly critical and important question of attracting and retaining immigrants to Atlantic Canada. With us today we have two joining us by video conference, and Mr. Poshman, who's here in person. I think at committee will get to know me. I like to start with the video conference because I've had it disappear from time to time. So let's begin there, and we're going to start with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture with Mr. Dykstra. At about 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for this opportunity to speak on immigration in Atlantic Canada. As a representative of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and an immigrant myself, I'm pleased to discuss how critical and effective an immigration system is to agriculture and Canada's rural communities. The CFA is Canada's largest general farm organization, representing 200 farm families. Canada's agri-food sector contributes $108 billion to Canada's GDP, while employing 1 in 8 Canadians. Canadian agriculture was actually identified as a key growth sector in this year's federal budget, targeting growth in agri-food exports to $75 billion by 2025. This growth is only possible if the agri-food sector continues and can overcome the chronic labor shortages constraining the sector. A 2015 study conducted by the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council identified 59,000 vacancies across Canadian agriculture, a vacancy rate of 7%, while forecasting vacancies of 114,000 by 2025. This is despite increasing wages and decreasing unemployment in the sector. These vacancies result in $1.5 billion in lost sales each year, while also making it hard to transfer farms to the next generation. The average farmer is over 55 years of age. Uncertain access to labor and a smaller pool of experienced workers makes finding the next generation all the more difficult. Estimates suggest that over $50 billion of farm assets need to change hands over the next decade. Finding the right people to continue farming is critical to continued growth in the sector. Therefore, immigration is critical to the future of our industry. First, I would like to briefly discuss my own background to give you a better sense of where I'm coming from. We, my parents and younger brother, came to Canada in 1979 after exploring many avenues in Europe. The Netherlands was too small to allow for expansion to sustain 3 families. We started in Canada with 1 farm milking 30 cows. Today, together with my wife Bethany and 3 of our 4 sons, we operate 3 farms and milk 300 cows while employing 4 full-time employees. We have experience in hiring, and we know it is not easy. We started in Canada with for many farmers across Canada, the continued inability to recruit Canadian workers has required them to look abroad. This often requires access to international workers as a last resort, where extensive efforts to find Canadians have failed. This occurs for a number of reasons. Agriculture is primarily located in remote, rural parts of Canada. This limits the availability of local labor as rural populations continue to stagnate and, in many regions, decline. My home province of New Brunswick is a clear example. New Brunswick's population has declined by 0.5% since 2011. Even in the previous 5 years, which saw a 2.9% population growth in the province, it was uneven across the province. While some southern New Brunswick cities and towns experienced double-digit growth, less populated communities in the north saw continued declines. This is particularly true of the youth, with many leaving the province for post-secondary school and not returning, posing a significant challenge for agricultural businesses. The remote locations, combined with perishable and seasonality, create an extremely challenging labor environment. This is why the CFA supports funding for the Canadian Agriculture and Agri-Food Workforce Action Plan, a multifaceted strategy to improve access to our domestic workforce with a national career initiative, while also improving access to international workers and new Canadians. At this point, if Canadians are not available, farmers' only alternative is foreign workers for both seasonal and full-time permanent positions. Despite approximately 50% of agricultural jobs being year-round, there is no clear pathway to permanent residency because agricultural skills and labour needs are not prioritised within Canadian immigration programs. Express entry is geared towards high-skilled candidates despite the pressing need for workers in the agri-food sector, generally considered low or semi-skilled. While some food processing employees have come in through express entry, any chance of attaining permanent residency was shut down in 2016 when job offers were reduced from 500 to only 60 points. Combined with other skill requirements, any chance to bring agriculture or agri-food workers in through the program was lost. At the same time, provincial nominee programs vary considerably. Some are open to farm workers, but most offer no avenue to permanent residency for our sector. The CFA strongly encourages this committee to expand its analysis across Canada because the rural immigration issues facing Atlantic Canada affects agriculture and food across Canada. On the Atlantic immigration pilot, one of the most pressing labour needs for the sector is for general farm workers, which is categorized as NOC-C. While they are eligible under the pilot, a lack of awareness amongst farm employers has limited uptake with provincial outreach focusing on higher skilled professions. Farmers also find it challenging to identify experienced farm workers that meet the education and language requirements, despite a wealth of motivated and experienced candidates. Many international farm workers, despite having extensive agricultural experience, do not have high school diplomas. At the same time, while they can often meet the language requirements for listening and speaking a level 4 in writing and reading is rare because of the limited use of these skills in many farm settings. Limited uptake on the part of farm workers is directly tied to these challenges. At the same time, there is a broader disconnect between new Canadians and the opportunities that exist in agriculture and rural Canada, with settlement services primarily located in large urban centres. The demand for employment in agriculture is disconnected from many Canadians, particularly the recent influx of refugees who have often agrarian backgrounds. To address these challenges, the CFA proposes the following. First, identify agriculture, given the industry's significant labour needs, as a target for the pilot and broader immigration policy. Second, introduce flexibility within eligibility criteria to accommodate unique agricultural skill requirements, which often extend beyond traditional education, while allowing for additional time to meet language criteria. And finally, implement the Canadian Agriculture and Agri-Food Workforce Action Plan as a long-term roadmap to address agricultural chronic labour shortages. Canada requires a long-term rural immigration strategy to ensure immigration policy can capitalize on rural employment opportunities. This begins with pilots like the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, but requires further support for industry-led pilot projects and research that can help integrate new Canadians by bringing settlement agencies together with agricultural stakeholders. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dextra. And we'll next go to Mr. Campbell on video conferencing. And Mr. Campbell, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the committee. I am currently the president of a private economic development consulting firm here in New Brunswick, but I was previously the chief economist with the New Brunswick Jobs Board Secretariat, and in that role we spent an awful lot of time thinking about immigration, looking at the data, and trying to understand the best path forward. We had some influence into the Atlantic Immigration Pilot, and we think a lot of what was done under that program has been successful. We think there's potential for enhancing that even further. I know you've heard as a committee a lot of data, so I'm just going to zoom in on a couple of specific points that I want to raise that you may or may not have heard yet. And the first is around the shrinking regional labor market. So across Atlantic Canada, the labor market, the number of people working or looking for work actually peaked in 2012, and it's been dropping ever since. It's down by about 29,000 between 2012 and 2016. At the same time, across the country, the labor force, the total number of people working or looking for work, has expanded by 600,000. Now, if you look closely at that 600,000, there's actually been 624,000 landed immigrants added to the national workforce, and the number born in Canada has actually shrunk by 27,000. So there's more people that are born in Canada leaving the labor market every year than joining the labor market. So across the country, immigration on a net basis accounts for all of the workforce growth across the country. And so we need to be thinking about the national context when we look at Atlantic Canada. If you look at the population, the younger population, the population between the ages of 25 and 44, the workforce in Atlantic Canada actually peaked way back in 1990 and has declined by 124,000 people ever since. So in the information that I've sent to you and the committee in advance, I show a direct correlation between GDP growth over time and workforce growth. So in the 70s and 80s, there was thousands and thousands of people added to the workforce every year, and that provided the talent for entrepreneurs to expand and industries to expand and GDP to grow. As that workforce has been shrinking, the GDP growth in New Brunswick specifically has actually been close to zero, actually on an average annual basis, 0.3% since 2009. So our GDP growth has been flatlining, and that has a lot to do with the labor market. So I would argue that this is probably the biggest public policy challenge facing Atlantic Canada, at least in our lifetime. All of the other initiatives, the supercluster initiative, all of the other important initiatives being done by provincial and federal governments will not be successful unless we can get the labor market growing again. And this is a huge challenge. I estimate that we need roughly 150,000 new people through immigration over the next 15 to 20 years in New Brunswick. And that kind of boost in immigration hasn't been seen since the mid-19th century as a share of the population. So we don't have a track record. We don't have the infrastructure in place to support that. So we have to do a lot more federally, provincially, and locally to take this issue seriously and make sure not only are we attracting new immigrants aligned with workforce needs, but also doing whatever we can to retain them. The second point I wanted to raise this morning with you is this issue of what I call leveling the playing field. So in large urban centers across the country that have a history, the track record of immigration, they have integrated immigrants well into their workforce over the years. You will see in the documentation that I sent you, over 50% of everybody working in the Toronto administrative services sector is an immigrant. 76% of everybody that works in manufacturing and utilities occupations in Toronto is an immigrant. In New Brunswick, that number is 3%. So in the big centers across the country, there's a long track record of hiring and integrating immigrants into the workforce. We don't have that here. But the bigger issue is that these employers are hiring immigrants off the street. And this is a big distinction, and I think one that we ran into when we started rolling out the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. So we went to the national and international firms that were based in places like Moncton and St. John, and we said, hey, we've got a deal for you. We'll allow you to recruit internationally, and you can bring workers into your facilities in Moncton or St. John or wherever in the province. And these firms responded, well, we hire lots of immigrants in Toronto and Montreal and our facilities in Calgary and in Vancouver, but we don't have to recruit them internationally. We're recruiting them off the street. So you're asking us to take an additional hurdle and actually do our recruiting in Eastern Europe or in Asia or in South America. And so this has been a bit of a challenge. So we have to figure out how to make the attraction of workers to important industries in Atlantic Canada as easy as possible. I understand that we can't flood in tens of thousands of people that don't have jobs and just hope that they attach to the labor market. But we certainly have to do a better job. And this is a national issue. If you look across the country, since 2010, the largest urban centers in the countries have seen very robust employment growth. Mid-sized and small urban centers have actually seen very weak employment growth, and that's from Sarnia and Thunder Bay right across the country for the most part. So this is an issue that's not just facing Atlantic Canada. It is an issue that will face the entire country. And the last point I want to make here in my introductory remarks is what I call addressing the elephant in the room. So I know there's lots of folks who think because the labor market participation rate is relatively low in New Brunswick and across Atlantic Canada, that there should be more workers here to work the jobs that are available. And in fact, I think there is some potential for that. But for the most part, if you can't find workers locally, if an employer in good faith tries to recruit locally, pays competitive wages, and can't find workers, we shouldn't be putting them at a disadvantage. If you look at the labor market participation rate among the population 25 to 54, so the core labor market, it's actually as high, if not higher, in Atlantic Canada than it is across the country. If you look at urban center labor market participation rate, again, it's very similar, and I have charts in the documentation that I sent to you to show this. The labor market participation rate in urban centers is as high, if not higher, than other urban centers across the country. So we do have a higher share of our population that collects employment insurance every year. That is an issue. It's not something anyway, the bottom line is when it comes to employment insurance, there are people, because of the seasonal nature of some of our industries, that use that program, and we shouldn't use that as an excuse not to make sure we have workers for key industries. And again, part of this is an urban-rural issue. In urban centers, the EI usage rate is as low as the national average in most urban centers across Atlantic Canada. So I would just urge you, when we look at this issue, to understand it at a strategic level, the importance of immigration long-term, look at it from a very specific export and strategic industry perspective, because if we can't find workers for those industries, and agriculture is certainly a very strategic industry for the region, if we can't find workers for those industries, and if those industries actually start to decline their investment in this region, and by the way, they are, we have a number of firms in Atlantic Canada that have actually moved operations to places like Toronto or Chicago because they could actually access workers at the same wage rates they were paying down here, cheaper in the larger urban centers. And if you go to those facilities, they're almost all immigrant workers. So we have to have, I think, a little bit more nuanced understanding of the challenge here and a nuanced understanding of the opportunity. And we need to make sure we put this issue front and center, because the rest of it, all the other things we do, the investments we make in post-secondary and super clusters and roads and infrastructure won't matter if we don't have the people that are able and willing to work in the industries that we have down in this part of the country. So I think I'll leave it at that and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Poshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Posh or?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Thank you to the committee for your kind invitation to address an issue profoundly important to me and to my region. As a disclaimer, and for the record, I work for an independent, nonpartisan think tank, a charity, and I don't speak for any government and may not speak for my board or our members. As a starting point, the overarching imperative, and we've heard a lot about it, the overarching imperative for the Atlantic region with respect to immigration is that we need more of it. In the Atlantic region, natural population growth slowed a lot in the early 1990s and turned negative during 2012. Since 1991, the Atlantic province's annual population growth rate has averaged 0%, and the total population growth necessarily has been zero over that period. Together with demographic aging, this makes sustaining public finances, pensions, and services very difficult for all of us. The natural rate of population increase depends on the lifetime fertility rate of provincial residents, because the Atlantic provinces' total fertility rates is lower than the Canadian average, and trends in fertility don't shift easily. Immigration is tremendously more important to future population growth in the region than it is elsewhere. Immigration, though, even at many levels higher than Canada has seen in recent decades, cannot meaningfully change the age structure of the Canadian population. In the Atlantic, however, even a small number of immigrants that are attracted and retained can make an important difference to population growth trends. Atlantic Canada in 2014-15 accounted for 6.6% of the total Canadian population, but accounted for only 3.2% of new immigrants. were Atlantic Canada to have matched the Canadian average for immigration attraction and retention relative to the resident population over any sustained period in recent decades, the region's population growth rate would be trending upward rather than flat or down. So, in other words, a few thousand people goes a long way in the region, and the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program the federal government announced earlier this year is indeed welcome. So what's the catch? And Mr. Campbell touched on this. It's not news that economic growth in the region has been sluggish. Among Canada's 10 provinces, for instance, the Atlantic 4 have recently had the highest unemployment rates at above 8% and typically have the lowest employment to population ratios overall, that's including urban and rural areas. Rural residents in the region, like many in the rest of Canada, tend to look at the levels of unemployment and underemployment and wonder, where's the case for more bodies? I've had federal officials say the same thing to me. Implicitly or even explicitly goes the story. More immigrants must equal more unemployment and a higher unemployment insurance bill or higher provincial social assistance bill. Employers see this rather differently. They search everywhere for skilled bodies, for the knowledge and experience they need, and employers routinely find themselves looking outside. This scenario plays itself out across the region, urban and rural, for large and small businesses, and it plays out across the full range of skills, from the low end of the skill range to the high end. The role of the labour market impact assessment with respect to temporary foreign workers does remain dubious. Where required, the LMIA requires potential employers to prove a negative, that no Canadian worker is available to do the job. This is a rather pedantic bureaucratic exercise, and this policy prescription is past its expiry date. Efforts instead should go to developing routes to permanent residency and eventual citizenship. And the Atlantic pilot is an example of how to test approaches to this issue. Excuse me. Meanwhile, for many employers and in many communities, access to fresh bodies is their number one concern. And when I talk to small businesses and large businesses, and I say, "What's your issue?" It's absolutely universal. It's getting bodies, and that this does speak to the likely success of the immigration pilot from a hiring perspective, as indicated in the background material, which you may have. Prepared by our Director of Research, David Chondy, early data that indicate that people are showing up. And as I said, a few thousand people in the Atlantic provinces goes a long way in percentage terms. It takes surprisingly few of them to offset the decline in fertility rates, especially in PEI. And that's good news. Our report also indicates the provinces have had success in taking up most of the available slots within the provincial nominee program, through 2016 at least, with solid numbers for the Maritimes through the first seven months of 2017, in other words, through July. That's good, even if it raises a question this committee might like to ponder, which is, so why are there numeric limits on the PNP? I can't make up any answers that make any economic sense to me. But there is more on the good news front. A decade ago, I would have been quite concerned that successive waves of immigrants were not catching up economically at the pace they had previously, towards being on an employment par with native-born Canadian or prior immigrants. Recent data suggests that while this remains a concern, it may not be a growing one. It's looking better. Immigrants find work, or they create it. They start businesses. It's natural. They pay taxes. For many of us from immigrant families, and that includes me, nothing seems more natural than to seek to create something in a new country, something that wasn't there before, and that's good for all of us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think my time is up, and I thank you for yours.
Thank you very much. Just before we turn to the questioning, I want to welcome 3 students who are joining us and watching our committee work today from Glebe Collegiate Institute and Bell High School. Welcome, and we will be on our best behavior because we're being watched by students. This is, as you know, the Citizenship and Immigration Committee. And just so you know, on this side we have government members, on this side we have opposition members, and on this committee we take turns asking questions, and we begin with the government side MP and Ms. Zahid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Campbell. Yesterday, we just heard at our meeting from Cape Breton's councillor Amanda McDougall that while there were excellent access to settlement and other support services in major centres such as the Halifax, but smaller communities such as Cape Breton were having much more difficulty with retention, as people they wanted to stay could not get access to the help they needed. So does this track with your experience, and do you have suggestions how to address this regional inequality?
So thank you. The first challenge is that a lot of these immigrants are coming without actual jobs. So we need to do a better job of matching the job opportunities in the community to the immigrant population that's coming in. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing we need to do is a better job of retaining these immigrants, and I think that is a challenge in a small community because you don't have the kind of ethno-cultural community groups and infrastructure and ecosystem to support them. So I think we need to target maybe specific countries, do a better job of trying to cluster our immigrant population so that they can have a little bit of critical mass in terms of a population base, even in small communities. But we certainly need to do a better job of retention, of integrating them into the communities, looking more closely at churches and civic groups and the role they play. And also the settlement services. As my colleague said, in smaller areas, settlement services tend to not be as developed as they are in the urban centers. So we need to do a better job about that. But this starts fundamentally with an economic base. And a lot of the immigrants that come to Atlantic Canada, the ones that leave, don't have a solid economic foundation. They pass they get all the points, so they get to come to the province or the region. But they don't actually have a job or an economic opportunity along with that. So they don't necessarily attach properly to the labor market, which was the main reason, by the way, for the Atlantic immigration pilot. I mean, we had economists from Romania working in call centers because they passed all the tests and they got all the points they needed to come to Canada, but they couldn't find a job in New Brunswick. So if you want a call center worker, go find somebody with the skills. Don't go find an economist, and that's an actual example. So even in Cape Breton, we need to do a better job of finding specific job opportunities for these immigrants even before they arrive. We can use the school system better, the community college system and the university system as a conduit for new immigrants to integrate into the community. So I think there's a lot more we can do.
Do you see that the different ethnic communities, if people are coming from different ethnic communities, are there like areas where they are given help to integrate into their own ethnic communities, the languages they can speak with more fluency?
So again, in smaller communities, that's more difficult. In larger areas like Halifax and Moncton, we're seeing that a lot more substantially. You're actually seeing churches and other groups that are catering to specific ethnic communities. In smaller areas like Cape Breton, it might be more of a challenge, but it is fundamental. You know, as we look, that's why I said this is the biggest public policy challenge of our time, because it's going to take a major effort. And we put lots of effort in certain areas, but I don't think we're putting enough effort into this. Even with the Atlantic immigration pilot, unless it's changed, it didn't come with any new federal dollars. So I think in reality, we need to think about how we fund immigration. I like to say it costs $250,000 to take somebody born in New Brunswick to the time they enter the labor market. If you bring in an immigrant, the cost to get them into the labor market is almost nothing. So if we have to spend $10 or $20 or $30,000 in public dollars to get that immigrant effectively integrated into society, that's still cheaper than a native-born Canadian. And I understand the facetious nature of that, but it's just an interesting point as we look at how we develop labor markets in the country.
I know a number of years ago some IRCC offices were closed in Atlantic Canada. I understand that PEI is still without an IRCC office. Has this lack of services on the ground presence impacted your relationship with IRCC and the department's understanding of the immigration challenges in that region?
I think it has. They closed their office in Moncton as well, and Moncton is attracting more immigrants than any other part of New Brunswick. So, yeah, I think that was a mistake, in my opinion. You need to have these people on the ground to understand the challenges and be able to work directly with the immigrants in local communities. Anywhere where there's a concentration of immigrants, we need to have those federal facilities.
Next question is for Mr. Dijkstra. Earlier in our study, we heard from a number of witnesses, including Judy Morgan of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and former New Brunswick Premier, Mr. Frank McKenna, that it would be desirable to find a way to link our temporary foreign workers to this program, to both provide them a path to PR and a recognition that they are already here and working, and they are more likely to be retained. So is that something that you see as both feasible and desirable, and do you see any challenges to that?
Of course, that is very desirable to do that and go that path. The one lacking opportunity in that is, again, the services that the rural areas have. So if they come to the rural area, and I'm just using my hometown, Salisbury, we are 20 minutes away from Moncton. These folks, when they come as temporary foreign workers, they're usually housed by the farmer in the case of my expertise, and they are being housed there. So they have to then find housing to begin with, but then they're still a long ways away from the facilities that can help them overcome their first few years. And what we have seen over the years that when I see some of these certain ethnic communities, when they come to New Brunswick, they are there for a few years, and then they migrate again to central Canada, where the larger centers are for their ethnic communities. And that is frustrating as heck, because just when you get acquainted with them, they leave, unfortunately. And so for that reason, it is urgent that, yes, let the temporary foreign workers stay, but that there's more money used and invested to retain them in the rural and the smaller communities. If you go and look in Ontario, you see the ethnic communities everywhere. Unfortunately, in Atlantic Canada, you hardly see them because of the huge difficulties that they have to stay in this here area because of lack of their own fellow ethnic community people. And so when I first came, there was nothing in my area either. Now we chose to do that, and we all have choices that we make. I wanted to be absorbed into the Canadian in the Canadian system as fast as I could possibly be absorbed into it, and so we left our past behind. But at the same time, a lot of the ethnic communities want to retain a lot of what they have done and what they do, and want to pass that on to their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zahid, and we move to Mr. Soroya.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much, and thank you for the panel for coming. We all want Atlantic Canada to do good. We all want Atlantic provinces to do well. We all want more immigration. We all want to make sure we go back to the 1966 level of 10% of Canadian population. At the same time, we want to make sure the people we bring, we keep them. We have the jobs for them, and we have a plan. We have a system. We can keep them. I'll tell you the personal experience. A few years back, I met somebody who was immigrated to Manitoba and couldn't find anything else. The address was in Manitoba, but meantime, he was looking for a job in Toronto. So this is the question I have let's start with Mr. Dijkstra. Mr. Dijkstra, you threw lots of numbers, the 59,000 vacancies and the stuff. How would these new tax changes would make, as you're aware, the tax changes, tax planning under private corporation, that is liberal, have underway are obviously going to cause drastic changes to the agriculture sector. Your organization outlined the proposed changes will increase complexity and uncertainty to any farm business that has incorporated, which represent 25% of all farm businesses across Canada. Could you speak how these changes will make negatively impacting Atlantic Canada's economy and keeping those migrant workers back in Atlantic Canada, please?
Thank you for your question. With regards to retaining and investing in farms,
Yes.
every one of us invests on a daily basis, and it is regardless of the tax system at play. We have to learn to live with the tax system, how it's implemented, how the shortcomings of the tax system are working. We try to alleviate that through working with it in a fashion that it is fruitful to each of the individual entrepreneurs. By basically having those 59,000 people, be it skilled, low skilled, or no skill, and not working on the farms that they could be potentially be working on, is a lot more costly. The cost is exuberant. As it's stated in my presentation, $1.5 billion worth of losses that could have been earned and stayed in the country. So now we import all that product that normally would have been produced within the country. That is where the shortcoming comes in. And that is where our tax dollars have to come to work and say, how can we alleviate that shortcoming of $1.5 billion? So if you are serious about, as a committee, to alleviate this problem in all of Canada, but specifically in Atlantic Canada, I encourage you to find ways to retain these numbers of people that we require in Atlantic Canada and in Canada as a whole, and so that we may keep them here, and that we also then basically make money with those individuals, and that those individuals that have the desire to come have a future here in Canada for their children. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Campbell or Mr. Poshman. The Energy East pipeline was canceled as of last week. The Liberal federal taxes are going up on CPP and carbon tax. In the provinces of PEI, Newfoundland and New Brunswick, I believe it's PST, or the provincial tax has gone up to 10%. The total HST is 15%. All the new migrants coming to any new place, they mostly work in the lower wages, sometimes in minimum wages. How will this affect the bringing people back to Atlantic Canada, please?
So I don't know.
Excuse me, I'm happy to take that.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the member for the question. No question the Atlantic provinces are high-tax provinces relative to most of the others, and some of them have backed themselves into difficult fiscal situations. On the other hand, notwithstanding some history, Nova Scotia, for instance, is cruising with a balanced budget. PEI is near to there, and New Brunswick is not that far off. The influences in Newfoundland and Labrador are a little different, mostly oriented towards oil. The no-go decision with respect to Energy East is primarily market-driven, secondarily owing to regulatory barriers. It's unfortunate for the province of New Brunswick. Things may change in future. They may not. Time will tell. If I may, on the urban-rural question, with your permission. Population centers, think about them as gravity centers. The bigger the population, the bigger the gravitational pull, and that includes neighborhoods that have a particular ethnic focus. It is always going to be the case that population centers will attract more people more readily and more easily than a rural area will, simply because that's where the opportunity is, that's where the higher wages tend to be. Meanwhile, in the resource sector and in the agricultural sector, it's a competitive world. and the resource firms, as well as farms and the agricultural sector, they've had to boost their productivity to stay competitive. They automate, they hire fewer people than they used to do. We still need people, but there's no question that there's a long-term economic draw away from rural areas to the center.
We were going to introduce a motion. I want to make sure what you think what the impact is. The pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee immediately undertake a study of no less than 2 meetings on the proposed changes to the tax system outlined in the government's consultation titled Tax Planning Using Private Corporations, was publicly released on July 18th, 2017, in order to assess the potential impact on the government's proposal with regards to immigrant small businesses, owners, and self-employed immigrants. How will this affect your communities?
I believe you're presenting that as a motion. I'm just.
It's just a question.
He did not move the motion.
You're not moving a motion.
No.
You have 4 seconds to respond.
I am sure the committee will make the finest and wisest choice available to it.
Okay, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations. What I'm hearing, I think, from everybody, actually, is the issue around immigration and the need for immigration for Canada to sustain our economy in a variety of different sectors. So on my first question, really, as the government is gearing up for November 1st to table the immigration levels numbers that we would be expecting for next year, I wonder, in this context, would you agree that we need to increase the immigration levels numbers from our current 300,000 level to a higher level? And by way of context, the former minister, John McCallum, had a advisory panel, expert panel, who gave him advice, and the advice was that the immigration levels number should increase to 450,000 over 5 years, and that was back in 2016. So I wonder if I could get a quick answer from around the table here, and starting with Mr. Dextra.
Thank you for that question. I cannot speak on numbers, but that the immigration levels should increase is a definite yes. Thank you.
Mr. Campbell?
So I think we need to get there. I'm not sure we need to get there in a very short term, but ultimately, immigration levels in Atlantic Canada need to get up to at least 1% of the population, which is where they are now nationally. And I think they're going to have to get closer to 1.5%, maybe 2%, which would require significantly more. And what we're seeing now is the provinces much more competition for immigration. So I'd like to see more thought given to developing those national targets based on regional and local priorities. Because as I said before, a lot of small and mid-sized urban centers across the country are starting to feel the challenges associated with the shrinking labor market, and you're going to need more immigrants in North Bay and Sarnia and Thunder Bay and across the country. So I think eventually, in the fairly short term, we're going to have to get to that number for 425 or 450.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poshman?
Thank you for the question. The challenge isn't with the particular level or the target number. It is with hitting it, and certainly we'd like to see a bigger number and a bigger number achieved. It's only in recent years that the Atlantic provinces have woken up to the need for immigration, and it's good to see some improvement. But we've a very, very long way to go. Ramping up to 450 nationally would be a challenge in the short term, but if we could do it, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. We used to have programs in our Canadian immigration system, the Canadian Experience class, the Federal Skilled Workers class, and the Skilled Trades class. And now more and more over the years, people have veered towards one sector of the immigrant population. And I think, as mentioned, I heard from a variety of different places, and including in the panel today, that we actually need low skill, medium skill, as well as high skill, the full spectrum of different workers coming to Canada. But right now, our immigration system does not reflect that. It tends to skew towards one area, and hence we're not meeting the labor demands, particularly, for example, in the agriculture industry. People come as temporary foreign workers, but really what we need, it sounds to me like, from Mr. Dextra, that we actually need a pathway and for these individuals to come as permanent residents. So I just want to expand on this a little bit from the presenters. In terms of a change in our immigration policy, should we be then changing our immigration policy to reflect that need for a range of workers like we used to have previously? Mr. Dextra, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree with that 100%. It's the same thing as what we have when we first came to Canada as in the investor group. You basically were allowed to come in on a somewhat fast-track approach. And the same thing we should do now with the lower skilled immigration levels when there is a need for it. And it shows that there's a significant need for it because of the temporary foreign workers. So yes, I would wholeheartedly concur. But again, I repeat, it also needs then the backup of the rural areas or from the government, that in the rural areas there is a support system for these newcomers in place.
Thank you. I want to build on that, on the question around support system, and I think, Mr. Campbell, you mentioned it in terms of investment. Because if you do bring in a new population of people, you do need to have the infrastructure to support people to integrate into the community and to be successful in the community. So I wonder, Mr. Campbell, because you touched on that, what do you think the government should do in terms of that infrastructure building that is required in the Atlantic provinces?
I'd like them to spend a little more money, not just federal, but also provincial and even local. I think, as I said before, it takes a lot more money to bring somebody from birth into the labor market and a lot more longer period of time than to bring an immigrant. So if we're talking about the cost, it's going to be a lot less to bring an immigrant in. So I don't have a number for you today, but I would like to see more money invested in our communities, particularly in areas where the ecosystem for immigration is not that developed, to make sure that there's a kickstart there to get this infrastructure in place to support these immigrants as they settle. And I just want to come back to your point, because I think there is a difference between large urban centers and the rest of the country. In large urban centers, the immigrant population is distributed across the labor market, in service industries, in manufacturing, and in higher skilled. But if you look in smaller urban centers, and places like Atlantic Canada, the immigrants have historically been clustered in highly skilled occupations and in immigrant investor categories. And that's because of family class immigration and refugees and all of the other categories that have benefited the large urban centers more than smaller urban centers. So in a place like Toronto or Vancouver, you'll see immigrants distributed across the labor market, not in a place like Moncton or Halifax.
So I want to bring us to the next issue. In terms of refugees, we've had previous panels from Atlantic provinces come in to talk about, the desire to increase refugees into the Atlantic provinces as well. The UNHCR, in fact, just sent us a letter to a committee suggesting a model related to that. And so I wonder whether or not, in terms of resettlement of refugees, would it be desirable for the Atlantic provinces to also see an increase in refugee resettlement numbers into those regions?
Very, very briefly.
I will start with Mr. Campbell.
Yes, I think so. But remember, they take much more time and effort to integrate into society and into the labor market, because they're not coming as economic immigrants. They normally don't have the language skills. They don't have a specific labor market skill per se. So I think more refugees would be good for the region, but you have to understand the time and effort required to integrate them into the labor market is much higher than economic immigrants.
And so hence,
I need to end there. That's 8 minutes. Thank you.
Resettlement support.
Ms. Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. You each bring a very interesting perspective to this conversation, so I appreciate it. I'd like to start with Mr. Dykstra. First of all, you had mentioned the CFA's workforce development plan. I'm wondering if that's something that we could have submitted to the committee to include in our evidence. Would that be possible? Can you provide that, Mr. Dykstra?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And I also wanted to talk to you about succession planning for farms, and if you think there's a role for immigration. I mean, we'll use farming as an example, but our other witnesses might want to talk about that as well in the context of other business succession planning, too. Could you give me your perspective?
Well, succession planning takes a long time. And usually it does not start on the day that you want to move the farm over to the next generation or to a newcomer or to a local. It doesn't matter who. The succession planning starts basically when you start farming. What is your vision for the future? So when we basically started farming and we got married, Bethany and I, basically, when the first son was born, the first idea was, okay, he will inherit the farm in all likelihood, unless he wants to do something different. Then number 2, 3, and 4 came along, and it became more difficult. But at the same time, at that time, you do all your plans already. This is not a last moment plan. It's the same thing with all business. It is a long-term goal. And you have to go with the flow. When the Minister Morneau makes a tax announcement that he wants to change the tax system for small businesses, be they incorporated or be they used as sole proprietorships, it all has an effect. And that's why everything needs to be taken into context, as in, okay, when we want to change something, keep in the back of our mind, a lot of people have depended on the on a system that we had. So what is the impact? And that is what we are asking for. It's the same thing if I expand my farm, that means there will be an impact on the labor force. That means, can I find enough labor? Okay. Unfortunately, the labor market, when it's 10% unemployment, does not necessarily mean that there is 10% available of the labor force for my farm work. Unfortunately, the real truth is there might be 2%. Maybe 1%, because we have been shipping out our youngsters, I'm sorry to say so, and it may sound a little harsh, and it may sound a little bit more farm-like, but we have shipped them out west, left, right, and center. What we have left are the ones that are less able to do the work that we require them to do. Okay. And that is why, yes, the numbers are high, and for that reason, we should get accustomed to that, and we need to bring that in a line that basically through population growth, that number 10% becomes a smaller percentage of the population. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, as far as business succession, how important is immigration from your perspective?
I think it's very important. I think we can be far more strategic about immigrant investment into the region. You know, when I came to Moncton, there was one sushi restaurant. Now there's like 20. And I'm not kidding. So the reality is that these immigrant investors come, and many times they do what they know, but we can be more intelligent about that in terms of matching the immigrant investor to potential business succession opportunities. Cavendish PEI has been benefited from substantial Asian investment over the years. Many of those businesses have been rejuvenated through immigrant investors into PEI. So I think we can do that in our tourism sector and many sectors around the province. Finding those business owners. I think the transition period takes a while. I don't know that it takes a whole lifetime, as my colleague said, but it could take a year or two. We need to have a mechanism where the potential buyer of the new business can shadow the current owner and take part in the business for a while to see if there's a fit. So there's, I think, a lot more work we can do to plan that or structure that, but it's definitely a big opportunity.
Okay. Do we have any numbers, either from yourself, Mr. Campbell, or Mr. Poshman, on the number of businesses that will transition in Atlantic Canada? Do we know those?
I believe the rough number is a lot. I don't know if David has one a little more specific.
Okay.
Well, there's 40,000 businesses in New Brunswick, and so I would suspect with the aging demographic, I would suspect a pretty big share of those are close to transitioning. I know that the accountant firms tell me here in Moncton that they've been dealing with that it's multiplied in terms of their business, trying to figure out how to sell their business and capitalize on the equity in their business. So I can't give you a number, but it's definitely in the hundreds every year and definitely in the thousands over a 5 and 10 year period.
Okay.
Accountants.
Okay, great. Mr. Campbell, I also wanted to talk to you about Atlantic Canada has an abundance of post-secondary schools for the size of our region. Do you think that's something that we can leverage to attract more people to the area?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, every immigrant would come through the post-secondary system, either the college or the university system, because they would then be accredited with a Canadian degree or diploma. They would have had the time to put up with our winters for 2, 3, 4 years. They'd really understand if they want to settle down their life in Atlantic Canada. So I think we can do a lot more. I'd like to even be more specific in terms of our targeting. So if we need 50 workers in IT, I'd like to go to Romania or the Philippines and actually say, come take this program at the community college. And there's no guarantee of a job, but there's jobs at the other end of your training in the sectors of demand in Atlantic Canada. So I think we could use certainly, I'd love to see the community college system and the university system much more used as a direct conduit for new immigration.
Okay. And the flip side of that, Mr. Dykstra, is I think I understand you saying we also need to have a stream for labor that is less skilled to make sure that, that's targeted as well. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. And of course, you don't pick basically low-skilled people. There are low-skilled people. And those are the ones that want to have opportunities as well. And those are the ones that you want to ask if you want to come to Canada. There is room for you here, rather than saying, okay, we pick out you, and you. No, you allow low-skilled people to come and inform them that there's work and a need for them here. To go back to the succession, when farmers talk about succession, most of the time it is a succession regarding within their family. And that is why it takes a long time. Yes, to pass the farm on to another individual and as they complete the sale, it happens, and it happens on a regular basis. That, yes, I concur with Mr. Campbell fully. That doesn't have to take a lifetime. That can take sometimes only a month. It just depends on where the desires and the needs are. But at the same time, we are in a family-oriented business, farming as a whole, and it doesn't matter if it is dairy or if it is grains or anything along the line. That is how it works. It is usually family that takes over. And so for that reason, I was more focused on the family transition than within succession to a third party. But that also...
I'm afraid I need to, if you could wind up, we're coming to the end of the session.
Basically, what I wanted to say is when there is sufficient cash coming across, it doesn't take time. When there is little cash to come, it is where it takes time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our witnesses, and that ends our first panel for today. We'll take a brief moment as we pause, and we will switch panels. Thank you for joining us from Moncton and here. We're going to come back to order. Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses for waiting, and Mr. Rivera from St. John's, Newfoundland, as well as Monsieur Laurent Martel from StatsCan. I think we'll begin with Mr. Rivera, and you have about 7 minutes to address the committee, and we thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much here from St. John's. I'm very honored to be part of this committee. Me and my wife, we came to Canada in 2002 as refugees, thanks to Canadian generosity. And since 2004, I joined the Refugee and Immigrant Advisory Council here in St. John's, which is a charity helping immigrants and refugees and Canadians as well deal with issues mainly from immigration and anything else from employment all the way to health and education and housing and whatnot. From my experience, our main issue here in Newfoundland is that we don't have access, other small organizations, we don't have access to let's say core funding, some funding that could help small organizations to thrive and to help newcomers to be part of the community. We have been working on donations, we have been working on the small grants, but still we feel really discouraged that there is no support for these small organizations. Here in Newfoundland and Labrador, although our newcomer population is not as big as any other provinces, we feel that the retention here is low due mainly to lack of information and access to services once you are outside the mandate of the federally funded immigration service provider. Also, there is a big need of multicultural organizations, you name it, you know, the Chinese Association, the Afghan Association, the Filipinos, the Syrians, the Colombians, and so on and so forth, to be able to establish themselves and be able to start the process of being part of the community. That requires a lot of support, and that is something that we don't have here in Newfoundland. We would love to see more activities around encouraging small organizations and ethnic organizations, if you want, to be part of the whole process of making Canada our home. On another topic as well, the process of international trained workers to be able to gain access to the recognition of the credentials and so on is still confusing, still slow, and professionals are really, really discouraged to be able to find meaningful jobs, mainly because of their qualifications not being recognized readily on time. That's another issue that requires support in the province. It requires more accessible information. The information is really scattered. Professionals have a big issue trying to find exactly what and how to do those, carry on with those elements. Finally, mental health is another issue that requires a strengthening in our province. Mental health is still very, very in the very early stages of being acknowledged as an issue that prevents newcomers to feel at home, to feel welcome. Services and support are still are just now starting to consider that newcomers can develop or are coming with any type of mental situations. I think that is more or less what we at the Refugee and Immigrant Advisory Council, which is the organization for which I am working for the last so many years, consider that are the key elements for us newcomers to feel welcome, really, and to feel that we can be part of the large community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we keep you there, and the committee will no doubt have questions for you. On va continuer avec Monsieur Martel.
We will continue with Mr. Martel.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to provide to this committee some facts on demographics in the Atlantic. So I will focus today on basically 4 messages. The first one, an important shift that occurred recently, as we've seen more deaths than births in Atlantic Canada. This means that future population growth in the Atlantic will have to come from other components of population growth, such as immigration or internal migration. I will also show on the PowerPoint that was distributed that over the recent years, the Atlantic provinces had some issues related to attracting immigrants or preventing their population from leaving to other provinces or territories of the country. And finally, I will conclude by nuancing these trends and showing that some regions of Atlantic Canada are actually growing, mostly urban areas. So on slide 3, you can see that in 2013, for the first time, more deaths, it's the line in red, there were more deaths, line in red, than births in the Atlantic provinces. Births are the line in green, leading to what we called, as demographers call, negative natural increase. So this is a first in Canadian demographics. Natural increase is actually negative for one region in the country. And according to Statistics Canada population projections, the gap between deaths and birth could increase in coming years, basically due to population aging. A large share of the population, mostly baby boomers, are now moving into their senior years, where mortality rates are higher, leading to an increasing number of deaths in the Atlantic, as elsewhere. And since population growth is low, fertility is fairly stable, the number of births do not increase, and even is showing a slight downward trend, leading to this situation. Alors à la slide numéro 4, la diapo numéro...
On slide 4, we can see that, consequently, Atlantic population growth must come from other factors than natural growth today.
These slides are only photocopied on one side, and we're missing the back side.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
We're getting them right now.
All right. So I would ask that you continue, but that you don't assume that the committee members have the slides. So you will have to continue.
Okay. Alors je montre sur une des diapositives.
On one of the slides that you may not have, I was saying that the level of demographic growth in Canada is about 1% currently. That's the highest demographic growth in G7 countries. But that national growth hides different gaps from one region of the country to another. So over the past years, it's the prairie provinces that had the highest demographic growth. That's a first. It's the 3 prairie provinces that together had the highest demographic growth. Atlantic provinces had the lowest demographic growth aside from PEI. On the graph, I break that demographic growth down based on the 3 major factors, so natural growth, and I showed that it's absent in Atlantic Canada, as I said, because there were more deaths than births. International immigration, so the total of immigrants, is positive throughout Canada in all regions, but it's not sufficient in Atlantic Canada to counter the loss to interprovincial migrations. And I also show that in a province like Alberta, there's natural growth, international growth, and interprovincial growth. They're all positive, very positive, and so that leads to strong demographic growth for that province. On another slide, I was showing that one of the challenges for Atlantic Canada is retaining recent immigrants. One of the statistics that we show is that among landed immigrants between 2000 and 2008, a little over 50% were found in those provinces a few years later. In Ontario, it was over 90% of immigrants who a few years later remained in that province. So recent immigrants in Atlantic Canada seem to head to other parts of Canada in a much higher proportion than elsewhere. And then I showed on a map that this demographic portrait of Atlantic Canada is nuanced because some regions of Atlantic Canada do have relatively strong population growth. And those are the urban areas of Atlantic Canada. Places like Halifax, Moncton, St. John's, and Charlottetown. The regions with negative population growth are rural regions in Atlantic Canada. On slide 7, I show that there are trends in interprovincial migration and interregional migration, and I distinguish rural areas from urban areas in the country and in Atlantic Canada. And what we see is the profile of migrants. There are significant losses in Atlantic Canada for young adults aged 18 to 28. Those young adults of 18 to 28 years of age in Atlantic Canada who live in rural areas seem to leave those areas in significant numbers to settle elsewhere in Canada or other areas of their province. So it's nothing new. This is a trend that has existed for a long time, yes, but one of the slides shows what happens in the rural areas of the prairies. You don't see that loss of young adults to the same extent as you do in Atlantic Canada. So there are demographic issues that are specific to Atlantic Canada in terms of retaining young adults in their early 20s up to about age 28. So in conclusion, it seems clear due to current demographic trends that differences in different areas of Canada are growing. And that's mainly due to the fact that immigration is the main driver of demographic growth. It is no longer natural growth. So we must keep in mind that the demographics of different Canadian regions is becoming more different. And we see that in demographic growth, population aging, and population ethnocultural diversity. Canadian immigrants settle in some specific areas, for example, major urban centers. So consequently, due to these demographic trends, we could think that the needs for public services and social programs and infrastructure are likely to become more region-specific. For example, for Atlantic Canada, there may be more challenges than elsewhere for the labor force and for healthcare and home care services for seniors, which will be a more significant part of the population. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Start with Mr. Whalen for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Riviera, for coming, and also thanks, Mr. Martel. I have some questions just to start off with StatsCan. I'm wondering, first off, if we can see some of the data that's presented on the StatsCan website in terms of demographic information on a more refined basis than province by province. Does StatsCan have access to information that might help us on either a riding by riding or a postal code by postal code basis? How refined can we get the information?
I think, yes, the information is actually available on Statistics Canada website, free of charge, of course, and it's related to the census, the 2016 census. So there's a web page with all the 2016 census results focusing on age and sex. And in there, you'll be able to have differences in terms of, for example, proportion of young adults, proportion of seniors, proportion of oldest old, proportion of young children living in the different regions of Canada. And we're going all the way down to, for example, what we call the census subdivisions, which are basically the municipalities across the country. So you'll be able, with this website, to compare, for example, what is the proportion of seniors living in that municipality in Atlantic Canada compared to any other municipality across the country. Okay. And that's very convenient.
So, Mr. Martel, with respect to the quarterly data that's published on the website,
yes,
is that also available at the municipal level, or is that type of information less refined because it's not based on the census?
Yes, the information that we have in terms of population estimates in between censuses are available on a quarterly basis at for the total counts, population counts only, and age and sex once a year. So once a year, we can get you information all the way down to the census subdivisions, and it's usually the population estimates based on July 1st, and it's released every month of September.
Awesome. When we look at, I guess there's three sort of factors that I was just taking a look at. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to think, as compared to national versus international migration, when I look at some of the data for Atlantic Canada, it seems as if the interprovincial migration is 4 to 8 times as important in population growth than international migration. So if I look at the annual numbers, for instance, immigration in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's plus about 500. But if I look at the quarterly data, even it's minus 500 or even minus 5,000 in some quarters. When we look at, I'm just looking at this year's data. So when we're focusing on migration, are there any things that we can look at that might help us in terms of not only retention of international migrants, but just retention of Canadians generally?
Usually the net international migration in the Atlantic provinces is positive, so meaning that these regions receive more immigrants than people leaving these regions, immigrants, and the net interprovincial migration rate is usually negative for these regions, meaning that there are more people leaving these areas for other places in Canada than people coming from other regions to establish themselves in the Atlantic. Those are trends that we've seen for quite a while, quite a few years. It's been pretty stable. These numbers, when you want to have a look at the most recent trends, I would say the best data source is the population estimates released on an annual basis. I would suggest to focus really on the dissemination that we're doing every month of September, because in there we've got the final data from ERCC. Plus, we're using the tax files to estimate internal migration, and you have something pretty solid, pretty robust in terms of data quality. So these are the trends you want to look at to kind of monitor or track down what are the changes in those patterns. But overall, these patterns are fairly stable for the last, I would say, 30 years, actually.
Okay. So, Mr. Martel, now that we know that there's been net out migration for the past 30 years and the birth rates have now gone below death rates, which is a critical factor, when we're focusing on immigration, we've heard a lot of questions about whether or not we need to grow the labor demand before we grow the immigration, or how they work together. Does StatsCan have information or tools that can let us know whether or not immigration is a leading or a trailing indicator for economic growth, and how those two interrelate? Immigration itself causes economic growth just by its nature, just as more people in the economy. But do you have tools available to us to see? And the reason I'm asking is we want to know whether or not we're succeeding, but we want to know what to measure against. Trajectory, if we can change the trajectory, I would think that's success, but how do we know whether or not we've changed the trajectory when we have so many competing variables to look at? Do you have tools that compare immigration and economic growth at the same time that we can use?
This is a really interesting question. It's been a long-standing debate in the field of demography, the links between economic growth and demographic growth. What are those links? And it's been a debate for the last 400 years, basically, in the field of demography and population studies. What I can tell you as a demographer is that there's for sure a link between the two. And we've seen usually when we're observing, and that's my job, when we're observing shifts in interprovincial migration patterns, usually we know that there's a link with economic shifts as well. a good example of that is what happened in Alberta very recently. We've seen a decrease in the movements towards Alberta in terms of internal migration, and we all know that the price of oil went slightly down recently. Economic growth had slowed down a bit in Alberta. So we don't have, in demography division, we don't have specific studies linking the two.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mr. Martel. If you don't have the studies, I'm just going to have one quick question for Mr. Riviere. Mr. Riviera, your organization does great work in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly in the Metro St. John's region, in helping new people start businesses and integrate into the community. If you were being asked to increase the level of service that you're providing, not just to 500 new immigrants per year, but something like 2,000 or 5,000 new immigrants per year, how much additional resources would you need as an organization to offer those services if you were going to have to offer them to a population of newcomers about 5 times as large?
Very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Whelan, for the question. The REAC has been working since 1983, and we can say that in the last 10 years, we have seen the number of people coming to our doors seeking for help. The last 3 years, we saw around 1,000 people per year coming to ask questions and require for services. That without us being able to outreach to the community, so there is still a large number of people outside that don't avail to services because they don't know that we exist and all organizations exist and can be done. Our budget for those 1,000 people is around $200,000 in a year, the way that we work our budget. So if we're going to be able to help a number of individuals increase that, so that could be the proportion more or less. But our problem is that the income that we have is really unstable, and we cannot focus properly in providing those services while we have to be out chasing money. So if we can have some steady income that allow us to outreach, to go out and knock doors and help those individuals that are homebound because they don't know that services exist, we will be able to spread the services. But the most important thing is to provide funding so that an information service can be developed such that anybody, a nurse, a doctor, a police officer, you as a member of the parliament can go in and find information easily on how to go about X or Y process. Say, to credential recognition, or how to get your driver license, or how to get your children transferred from one school to the other. So that the 3 elements that drives people.
I need you to bring this to a close. If you want to make a last sentence or two.
Sorry again?
Just I need you to wrap this up. We're just running out of time on this session.
Oh, yes, sorry about that. Yeah, the 3 elements that drives people out are employment, information, and transportation here in Newfoundland. Okay,
thank you very much. Mr. Maguire.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the panelists for their presentations as well. Mr. Rivera, just a quick question to you to start off with. You mentioned that mental health was an issue in regards to the situation in Newfoundland or St. John's. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes, recently, last 5 years, we could say, the mental health issue has been on the agenda. Just 2 or 3 years ago, a non-for-profit group was formed to deal with the mental health lack of services. Particularly the newcomers have no access to that kind of service for the main 2 reasons that I already mentioned: lack of information, and again, the services like translation, interpretation, and navigation to the system. Mental health has been a big drive for people not to stay in the province because they don't feel that there is a solution for them. And we as newcomers oftentimes consider mental health as a taboo, something that we don't talk, something that we don't disclose, and that makes hard for the people to get their life and be active members of society.
Mr. Martel, you indicated that of course, the death rate is higher than the birth rates for the first time. Does that? Can you compare? You said that was the first in Canada. Does that compare the territories in that area or Nunavut as well?
Not at all. In the territories, the fertility rate is much higher than elsewhere. Nunavut, for example, it's almost 3 children per woman. So the natural increase remains very strong, actually, in the territories. The Atlantic provinces, yes, it's the first time in Canadian history. That's a very important aspect, meaning that for the first time again, deaths are now outnumbering births, and the gap will increase in coming years, meaning that if these regions are to succeed in terms of bringing a positive population growth, they'll not only have to bring some immigrants, but they'll have to keep bringing more and more and more over the years because, yes, the natural increase is becoming more and more negative in the forthcoming years. All scenarios of our projections are showing exactly that.
Yeah, thank you. And is it also in your statistics, I understand that 1 in 5 people are over the age of 65 in the Maritimes?
I confirm, yes, it's the results from the 2016 census, the most recent result in the most recent census. And yes, I can confirm 1 out of 5 in the Atlantic provinces are now 65 and over. It compares, for example, to other provinces such as Alberta, where it's only 12%. So there's an increasing diversity in terms of the different population across Canada.
Yeah, and I would look at that as saying, my own 2 children are both in Calgary. They left Manitoba, and so I think there's a number of reasons why that city's a younger city, if I could put it that way, a younger region, if I could. Yesterday, Dr. Emery referred to the issue of capital requirements to make sure that there's jobs invested, and it's not all private. His reference was to even caregivers in some of those areas as jobs and public sectors and that sort of thing. One of the things that attracted people to Alberta for 3 different areas, their birth rates are higher. As you've said, they've got national and international migration have impacted that. But, so obviously if there's increased birth rates, there's lots of youth there. The national migration, because there's sometimes better wages, particularly in the oil sector, which was very capital intensive, and the international immigrants come in because even with all of that, there's still a shortage of workers. So can you just elaborate on your thoughts as to how that formation of capital impacts the demographics of people moving within our country, and has that got something to do with this?
Well, what I can say is obviously, I think you've said it all. I mean, we've seen the demographics of Alberta is really different right now. Part of the reason why is, yes, a lot of immigrants are coming to that province, a lot of internal movers as well, people leaving other places of Canada and going to Alberta, and that has an impact on the fertility rate, as you're saying, because not on the fertility rate, but on the number of births that province can generate, because there's more females in their prime childbearing years in that particular province than elsewhere. We've just said that in Atlantic Canada, there's 1 out of 5 people aged 65 and over. It also means that the proportion of females in their prime childbearing years, the proportion of these is lower than elsewhere, meaning that you don't generate as much birth in the Atlantic than you generate births in Alberta. So these patterns are making a huge difference in terms of the demographics of the different regions of Canada, and especially Alberta, leading to these differences and to these growing differences. And I think that's one message I want this committee to remember. There's a growing demographic differences between the different regions of the country.
And what do you feel are the major reasons, major issues that can be used for retention in those areas then?
As I said again, as a demographer, when we do see shifts in demographics, especially related to migration, very often it's because we've observed shifts into the economy of these regions a bit before. There's always a lag between the two, but usually we can see links between those two phenomenon, and so I guess future demographic trends in the Atlantic will be closely linked to economic trends there. That's what I could say.
And Mr. Rivera, have you noticed with the oil industry in Newfoundland as well, is there it's a capital-intensive business, but so is agriculture. And I would mention this to Mr. Martel as well. I mean, the agriculture is not just the production of the product and everything that goes with that on the farms, but it's the manufacturing of equipment, the export and transportation of the products, both for processing or domestically as well as internationally. Is there some stability in a strong agricultural industry as well as other capital-intensive industries that you feel would benefit particularly Newfoundland?
As a matter of fact, newcomers has been part of an increase in the agricultural production and new trends, and they're bringing new products to the market. There is a large number of newcomers that are working in startups to serve industries from different perspectives that never has been dealt with here locally in Newfoundland. There is an interesting trend of services provided locally for the oil and gas industry. But again, lack of information for these startups prevent them to be more successful in a short period of time. But we have that.
Yes, and of course that would go for fishing in your particular region as well. Recently, had some experience with the country of Iceland, and there's about 330,000 population there, 2/3 of it in Reykjavik, the one major city, I should say. They've got about 2.3 million tourists coming through Iceland this year. How big a role does tourism play in your markets? And Mr. Martel, is that a major industry in Canada that plays a role in because there's a lot of service industries required there?
Very briefly, either of you.
Oh, in our case, tourism is growing significantly here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Newcomers are playing a big role there, providing new services and new adventures in the province. Thank you.
That would be an information that I don't have, unfortunately, with me at this point.
Very much. Ms. Kwan, you have about 9 minutes to equalize.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Enjoy
Chair.
it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters. Mr. Martel, I'm wondering, do you have information that you can share with us with respect to post-secondary education stats, and particularly the spaces that are available, the comparison by way of tuition fees, and so on?
I wouldn't be able to comment on these as a demographer. We do have at Statistics Canada statistics on education, I guess, so could find you in the information, but I wouldn't be able to comment on this committee right now.
I wonder whether or not we could get that information from somebody in your department, perhaps not yourself, to share with us so that we can actually have a comparison of the Atlantic provinces to the rest of the country by way of post-secondary education spaces that are available, how many international students are taking those spaces, what's the tuition fee rates, et cetera, just so that we can get a sense of what that looks like in those provinces.
Certainly, I will follow up, yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And Mr. Rivera, thank you for your presentation. I think that from what we're hearing from a lot of people is that there is a need to increase the population in the Atlantic provinces. And of course, as we just heard, if you have a situation where the death rate is higher than that of the birth rate, the long-term trajectory is just not a good one, right? And so, so we agree that we need to increase the population, but yet we also heard that there is the lack of infrastructure to support the immigrant and refugee population in the Atlantic provinces. You come from that sector. You mentioned that you need core funding, to which you don't have even currently right now to support the 1,000 individuals, approximately 1,000 individuals to which you're trying to support in your community. And if we're going to look at increasing those numbers, you're projecting that about $200,000 per year per 1,000 people is the rate in which you need to increase by way of services. Can you break down for us in those services what are the kind of services do you need? You mentioned mental health support as one piece. Is language training an aspect of it? Can you just elaborate on that for us?
When I mentioned $200,000, Ms. Grant, was what REAC would need to be able to look after 1,000 individuals per year.
Correct.
In terms of services, adults don't have access to English as a second language services in a volume and in a depth that allows them to quickly gain access to the labor market. In terms of services that an individual require, more interpretation and language training, translation and these kind of services are required to be settled, to be organized, to be put in the market. There's a good number of individuals that are, for the goodness of their heart, they go and do translations, but there is no professional enough specifically for the mental health issues. Post-secondary education requires a little bit of a checkup because our teenagers come here and find a system in which they are placed where they don't feel fit because people from, say, Latin America come here to grade 10 and they already have seen all the subjects, so that is a motivation for them to skip school and to go out and abandon education altogether. So that is a trend that hasn't been in the numbers, and that is something that families really are concerned about for their children to be able to stay in a school and pursue a career.
Sorry, so on that last point, you're saying that parents are concerned about students staying in the school system? Like, you mean high school dropout rates is a concern?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know the tendency, the numbers, but some of the concerns that the families bring to us is how to keep their children, their teenagers, in school when they find that that is boring because there are topics that they already saw, that they feel that they're repeating, and the system does not help them to get ahead.
I see.
The numbers, I don't know.
Okay, so I see. So I guess what you're getting at then is the support network that's required for youth in the community, and particularly even in the educational system, in the K-12 system.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Is there a table in your community where there is collaboration between the local, provincial, and federal government in discussing how there could be a better strategy to support the refugee and immigrant population?
There is a program going on that is the Local Immigration Partnership, where a number of organizations sit around. But the focus of that particular group is more about welcoming communities and how to make people's life easy in day-to-day life. But there is no specific focus on issues like mental health and education to that level. So that is something that is really sorely needed.
Thank you. I wonder, it would be very helpful, I think, for our committee, if you don't have this information right now, to provide us with a list of organizations in your region that do resettlement services work, and what programs are within it, and so that we can get a glimpse of that.
There is only three of us: the Association for New Canadians, which is the federally funded, us, the Refugee and Immigrant Advisory Council, that depends only on donations, and the Multicultural Women's Organization of Newfoundland and Labrador, that focus mostly on women issues, and that's it.
No, that's it. Okay. So there's a lack of infrastructure, to be sure. Mr. Martel, I wonder, from a StatsCan point of view, for all of the different regions in the Atlantic provinces, would you have that information available as well in terms of what sort of resettlement services are available and provided in those regions? Just so, again, we can get a glimpse of it, of what that situation is. If we're going to be talking about the lack of infrastructure, we need to know what the baseline is,
Yes,
and then to sort of build on that to both attract and retain new arrivals.
I will follow up. Yes.
Thank you very much. I guess on the question around tourism opportunities or economic opportunities. I know that the government is aiming to make 2018 the year of tourism, and so there's a lot of effort going on around that. So with respect to that, for the Atlantic provinces, in that regard, do you think that there are actions that the government could take to help further advance that opportunity for the Atlantic provinces, the tourism opportunity? To Mr. Rivera.
Thank you. What we have been seeing is individuals coming to our door asking how to establish businesses, and that includes the tourism. There are individuals coming to us for tourist activities that are not regular here in Newfoundland. They have new ideas, new concepts to develop, but again, the lack of information, the lack of a central hub of information is something that prevents us to help them and then to find information and be able to develop those. The provincial government, I know, has a big effort, is making a big effort in developing the tourism part. But there is still a lack of connection between the street level and the planning and execution of things around here. Not only tourism, but very many other fronts that could be developed.
I see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Back to Mr. Tabera for 7 minutes, and then we'll be able to have one more Conservative questioner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question will be to Mr. Martel and Mr. Rivera. I'm looking specifically at the numbers in Newfoundland and Labrador, and in 1995 they had a population of roughly 567,000. But I also want to compare that to investments and sales of goods manufactured. So the population was roughly 567,000, and now it's at roughly 530,000 in 2016. But the investments in 1995 were 3 million, and in 2016 it was 12 million. And sales of manufactured goods in 1995 was 1.6 million. That had increased in 2016 to 4.7 million. So, Mr. Martel, you mentioned previously when you were speaking to another colleague that immigration versus economic growth, there's a link between the two. And with those numbers that I provided, can you just elaborate on the link there? We see that there is potential for investments and manufactured goods. However, the population is still a force that's kind of hindering that advancement.
That's a good question, actually. I haven't looked really on numbers for investments and goods. I'm more familiar, I would say, with numbers related to the population. One thing that I could say is obviously the population in Newfoundland and Labrador, as the other population of Canada and the other provinces and territories, has changed over the last 25 years. The age structure in particular is not the same anymore, and so different people means that they also consume different goods. The consumption probably habits, what people are consuming as goods and services now in the Atlantic as elsewhere is different than what they were consuming 25 years, 30 years ago, when there was, for example, a larger share of those young children, for example. Young families doesn't consume the same goods as a senior household, as a household where there's seniors. So there's definitely this to keep in mind, I would say. Not sure I can say more about that, but there's definitely, and as the population is getting older in coming years, again, we expect to see shifts in how people are consuming goods.
Mr. Rivera, if you can comment on immigration versus economic growth and the link between the two, as I stated earlier.
We have seen here in the province an increase in newcomer businesses, and that is a visible trend. So the more we have access to information and the more we have access to clear rules and clear regulation, the more chances are that those new startups, new businesses, new production are going to flourish here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
I just want to go back to previous meetings back in the spring. On June 19th, Mr. Adam Mugridge from Lewisburg Seafoods Limited testified that there is a labor shortage in rural communities with persists because of people leaving the regions. What attempts have been made to make permanent jobs for temporary foreign workers in seasonal industries? If Mr. Martel, you can start off, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Riviere.
I can only confirm as a demographer that yes, we do see young adults living in a greater proportion in the Atlantic, these rural areas, than elsewhere. And one of my slides is comparing the rural areas of the Atlantic versus those located in the prairie provinces. And you obviously can see that the rates of out-migration are way higher in the Atlantic. So that raises questions, I would say. Is this because there's a mismatch between the skills of the young adults and the labor market? It may be. I don't have the answer to this as a demographer, but definitely there's a different pattern in the Atlantic than, for example, in the prairie provinces. Our numbers at Statistics Canada do confirm that.
Actually, I'm just going to jump in. I'll get Mr. Riviere to answer this question. In terms of retention for young students, international students, what measures have been taken to develop by universities and colleges in partnership with provincial governments to keep their graduates within the region? That's the first question, but if actually, I'll ask that first, and then I'll go on to something else. Mr. Riviere, if you can comment on that.
That is one of the issues around that. We don't have very much access to that kind of legislation that is wrapped up between provincial government and Memorial University. But what we see on the trend that, again, the 1,000 people come to our door looking for help, is that the transit between international students and permanent residents is really hard for them to pinpoint. Again, for the same reasons, the three reasons that drive people out: lack of employment, lack of information, and lack of transportation. For the international students, applies the same issue as it applies to many others. Temporary foreign workers in the rural areas. You can imagine if we have, still a big gap of services here in the capital city, how that could be out in the rural areas. There is a lot of needs out there, but there is a catch-22 out there. If we have services there and there's no people, or we have more people and there's no services, where do we start? How do we break that, catch-22?
20 seconds.
Sorry about that. Just my last thing, if you can just table this, Mr. Martel, or send it to the committee. How many students graduate in Atlantic provinces, and how many students stay within the region 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, etc.? And if you can compare that to other provinces in Canada's provinces.
Are you meaning international students?
Students in general, international, and
Thank you. If you have that, that would be helpful.
I'll follow up.
Thank you very much. Mr. Soroya, you have about 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rivera and Mr. Martel, for coming. the more deaths than the birth is concerned in Atlantic provinces. We know that part now. The population is aging. The new people from 2000 to 2008, the number of immigration came to Atlantic Canada, then they left. This is the issue. What can we do? What can be done as a group, as parliamentarian, to retain them in Atlantic provinces? Anything? Any strong suggestion? What can we do to keep them up in Atlantic Canada?
I can answer to this that from a demographic point of view, from my perspective as a demographer, I can tell that immigrants in Canada are settling in mostly in urban areas of the country, some large urban areas, and previous studies have shown that part of the reason why they're settling more into these large urban areas is the presence of an already existing community of immigrants in these areas. So their immigrants are attracted by already a community that's existing in these urban areas. So this is something to consider for sure. And then again, I reemphasize the fact that very often we do see links between movements of population and movements into the economy. And again, Alberta recently was a good example, with fewer immigrants going to Alberta recently, and that's very likely related to the fact that the oil prices have gone down and the economy of Alberta has slowed over the last few months. So those are definitely two trends to take into account, into consideration in your work.
We talk about the tourist industry. We talk about what else can we bring the old system of an investment program. The people come and investing in the East Coast and Atlantic provinces. What do you think? What your thoughts are? Bringing people in to invest in the Atlantic provinces, that could help.
I wouldn't be able to comment actually on the tourism industry. I know very little about this.
Or any other industry.
Again, wouldn't been able to comment on a specific industry in the Atlantic provinces at this point. No.
Mr. Rivera, you want to add something up?
Oh yes.
Like in the business are location. For retention is information. That is something that is key for us to be able to stay.
Okay. Mr. Chair, Nick, want to ask a question?
Oh, how generous.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Soroya. Mr. Martel, Newfoundland and Labrador experience, and my colleague has referred to it previously, a massive immigration problem that started in 1992 with the collapse with the cod moratorium, and you saw the population drop from 580,000 in 92 to about 509,000 in 2007 when it started to rise again, but now we're falling again. I'm wondering if this is an echo crash, and I'm wondering that if you net out the effect of the population collapse as a result of the cod moratorium, that the Atlantic region as a whole isn't quite in as dire a situation as we would think, and that there is some hope for birth and death rates. It's just this multi-generational issue of all young people aged 20 to 40 having left the province for work be included, and not many of us being able to return home, is still going to be seen for about another 30 years, and then we're going to be in a new demographic regime. I'm wondering if you have any information or if you could comment on that as a demographics expert.
What I can say about this is looking into our population projection, and we do project the population at the province level for the next 25 years. That's what Statistics Canada has done and is doing on a regular basis. The concern is the fact. Again, I'm coming back to more deaths than birth. My concern is about natural increase, actually. And natural increase, according all scenarios done in our projection, are all showing that this should getting worse and worse in coming years. The deficit of births rated to deaths should increase, and that's regardless of the scenarios. That's regardless of how many immigrants you're having in the Atlantic. It's regardless of internal migration patterns. It's all going down. So I think that's something really to consider in this committee.
So, Mr. Martel,
this is a strong trend.
You're really saying that number of births per eligible childbearing female are low and we're reached a critical point regardless of any other demographic factor?
I think I'm more concerned about the fact that it's the number of deaths who's going up, actually, in the Atlantic. And it will go up as well in other regions of Canada. But, for example, fertility levels are sufficient in some other places to maintain this natural increase at a positive rate. In the Atlantic, the number of deaths is going up. The baby boom was strong in the 1950s and 1960s over there. These people are moving towards the older ages where mortality is higher. And so the factor that drives the natural increase the natural increase down is actually the increase in the number of deaths. So that's something that should stay, and it's fairly well predictable over the next few years as well. So there's not a lot of uncertainty related to this trend at this stage.
Thank you very much for that. We're just now over time, and we adjourn. And a reminder, we are meeting again tonight. Thank you.